Ma'am, Principal Ma'am, can I begin?
Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead, Miss Priya.
Good morning, children. Good morning, sir and Principal Ma'am. Today we are having this workshop based on hands-on experiments, and the resource person is Mr. Vidyadhi Raja. We would like to thank Mr. Vidyadhi Raja, Mr. Pattar, and Mr. Praveen and Vaibhav Rao from JNU for this wonderful opportunity that you have presented to
Good
our
morning,
children.
ma'am.
We thank you for taking this initiative, and I mean, I know it's going to be very it's really going to be wonderful. The children will be actually able to be use these hands-on experiments that you're providing, and at a time like this, I think it will be really beneficial to our students. And a little bit about Mr. Vidyadhi Raja. He is Professor Vidyadhi Raja is has joined IIT Kanpur for an integrated masters in physics, and he's a graduate from the IIT Kanpur from the batch of 1995 in physics. Subsequently, he has obtained a PhD in theoretical physics from the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, in 2001. Later, he joined the Oxford University, UK, as a postdoctoral researcher from 2001 to 2005. Since 2005, Sir has been a faculty member at JNCASR, presently a professor and also serving as the Dean for Fellowship and Extension Programs at JNCASR. Professor Vidyadhi Raja is also a visiting professor at Motorola India, University of Cincinnati, Burke Nanotechnology Center and Physics Department from the Purdue University, and an adjunct faculty position at Louisiana State University. So thank you very much, Professor Vidyadhi Raja. We are really indebted to you for this wonderful opportunity that you have presented to our students. Thank you, and I hand over to Principal Ma'am for a few words, and then we can begin the session.
Sure. It really amazes me that at a point when we are not able to step out the house, that we are having something like this, and it is going to be very helpful for our students. And like Ms. Priya said, that we are indebted to the team that is going to be taking us through this, and hopefully our students, my dear students, please do take notes, learn about whatever that, and of course you have to think out of the box, and you need to do a lot more than what is being said, going to be said today. And think out of the box and do wonders. You can create wonders with very limited items that you have at home. That's all it is, and hopefully we will come up with better working models, and really you can come up with something nice, hopefully, students, right? Thank you so much, sir. You can take it from here.
Sir, you are on mute. Sir, you are on mute.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mrs. Hema, and thank you everyone for arranging this at such a short notice. And am I clearly audible?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, so this is the first of its kind in JNCASR. This is a digital outreach program. Now, we have never done this before, so it's going to be new for us and probably for you as well. So my name is Vidyadhi Raja, and as Madam mentioned, I am a faculty member at the Jawaharlal Nehru Center for Advanced Scientific Research. This center was established way back in 1989, and today it's about 32 years old. So I'm here, I'm a physicist, and I'm also the Dean for Fellowship and Extension Programs. And today what I want to show you is that we have physics all around us. And what we need to do is to pick up things and be curious about them. Ask questions, and by asking questions, learn to solve the problems that these questions present to us. So let me begin with a preview of what's going to come in the next 1 hour or so. So Do we see the screen? Yes. So the first thing that we are going to do is to learn how does the internet work. And what you see on the screen here is basically light going through a pipe. Okay. So, and this pipe is basically called a optical fiber. So what are the principles underlying optical fiber? And what you may not know is that today's internet, on which all of us depend so much, in fact, this talk itself depends on the internet, is actually made possible by thousands of undersea optical fiber cables. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, if there is any problem at any point, please let me know. We will see. Okay. So that's the first thing. We will see how does light bend, how to make it bend, how to control it, and so on. Then,
Sir, we are not able to see the screen, sir.
oh, you're not able to see the screen.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we are not
we
able
will.
to see.
Yeah, we'll just share the screen. 1 minute.
Yeah.
ಇದು ಕೆಳಗಡೆ. Yeah. Is the screen visible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. ಇದು ಇಲ್ಲೇ ಇಟ್ಟಿದೆ. ನಾನು ನೋಡ್ಬೇಕಲ್ಲ. Yeah. ಇಲ್ಲೇ. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, see, I'm also learning how to see I mean, what is visible on the screen is not really clearly visible to me also, so I'm also learning this. Okay, so is the screen visible now?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so that's the title, Learning Science Through Experiments. And as you can see, this my name is Vidyadhi Raja, and Vinayak Pattar, Praveen, Vaibhav Rao, Dilip and Munegowda are helping us. Okay, so what I said is that, wait 1 second. Yeah. Just enter. Okay. So yeah, so I was saying that the first thing we'll learn is how does the internet work. And basically, the internet is made possible by thousands of optical fiber cables that are laid under the sea. And what you see here in this visual is basically light going through a pipe, and that pipe is basically an optical fiber. So light, normally we learn that it travels in straight lines, but when we use it in optical fiber, we are able to bend light. So what is the principle that underlies the bending of light, right? So refraction, total internal reflection, and so on. So we will see these things in action as we go along. The next thing is, so what you see here is basically the same thing. The red lines are these undersea internet cables, and what you can see is that there is a dense network of these undersea cables, and that's what makes the internet possible. Okay. So the next question we will ask is, how do aeroplanes fly? Right? So this aeroplane seems to be moving smoothly without actually leaving a jet, as the rockets do. So the principle on which the aeroplanes fly seems to be quite different from what the rockets use to propel themselves into space, right? So what is the principle that the aeroplanes use to fly? We will see some simple experiments which will help us to understand how do aeroplanes fly. Then the next thing we will do is we will try to understand how does a lightning form and how does it strike, right? So normally we know that air is an insulator, which means that, let's say, if you have a circuit and you break the wires, then it's not possible that the circuit will complete and the bulb will glow or the fan will turn on, right? So then how does the lightning, which is basically electric charge or an electric current, a huge electric current, how does it flow from the clouds to the earth, right? And we will see some simple experiments which basically explain this phenomenon of electrostatics. Now, I know that you are all studying in 9th and 10th, and some of these concepts might be beyond your syllabus. But what I'll try to do is to explain this to you in a way that will be accessible, and you will also be able to do some simple experiments which you will enjoy, okay, doing at home. Okay, so the last thing that we will see is something which is completely out of your syllabus, okay, but it's really fascinating. So some of the fastest trains in the world today are called magnetic levitating bullet trains. And the principle on which they work, okay, is something called superconductivity. Now, what is superconductivity is something, if I start to explain, it will take you 1 hour. But I'll give you a very brief account of superconductivity, and then we will show you a demonstration on how this superconductivity or levitation, magnetic levitation, how does it work? Okay, so let's begin with our experiments, right? Okay. So you can stop sharing. Yeah.
We'll start from optics.
Yeah, optics.
What will you choose?
Okay. So, yeah. ಅದು ಪ್ರೊಜೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಇಂದ ತುಂಬಾ ಬ್ರೈಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಪ್ರೊಜೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಇವಾಗ ಬೇಡ ಅಲ್ವಾ? ಹಾ, ಪ್ರೊಜೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಬೇಡ. ಯಾ. Okay. So what I have here in my hand is a laser. Okay. So is it visible? Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. So this is a 100 milliwatt green laser. Okay. And we know that light travels in a straight line. So here what I have is a mirror. Okay. So if I shine light on this, then what you can see is that there is the path of the laser is clearly visible when I scatter some dust, right? So this is an effect that is known to all of you, right? This is called the Tyndall effect, right? Because light is scattering against the chalk dust particles, and what you see here is basically light scattering off, and hence the path of the light becomes visible. If this dust is not there, then the path of the light will not be visible. Okay, right. So beginning with this, now let's do one more experiment where we will see the bending of light, okay, as it travels from one medium to another medium, right? So what we have here is a tank, okay, and yeah, so in this tank we have some water, right? And the water, in this water we have added a few drops of phenyl, okay? And the reason we have added phenyl is because the phenyl molecules are big enough to scatter light, okay? They are not too big and they are not too small, right? So they are not nanometer sized and they are not millimeter sized. So they are somewhere in between, and that helps to scatter light. So we will need some more chalk dust here, right? Yeah. So what happens now is that, do you see the path of the light? But you don't see the path of the light in the air, right? So to see that, we will need some more dust. Yeah. So do you see clearly that the light is now bending as it goes into the medium? The light is actually bending, so it's not going in a straight line, okay? And this phenomenon is called refraction, right? Which is different from reflection. So reflection happens into the same medium, but refraction happens when light goes from one medium to another medium. Okay, and many of you might have studied that this refraction is governed by something called the Snell's law, right? Okay, so now how is this related to what I asked in the very beginning? That is, how does internet work, right? And for internet to work, what must happen is that light must travel thousands of miles through these bending undersea cables and then reach the routers, okay, the main web servers, where it is converted back to electricity, and then the signal is extracted, and then what we get is an internet signal, right? So for that to happen, what must happen is that light must bend, right, inside the same medium. Now how does that happen? That happens when light goes from a denser medium into a rarer medium, okay, and also when the angle is beyond a certain critical angle, right? So let's see that happens. Let's see if that happens, okay? Yeah. Keep it here. Okay. Okay. So do you see this total internal reflection? So what happens is, if I keep changing the angle, okay, so at some angle, do you see this multiple reflections? Yeah. So what's happening here is that light is bending inside the same medium and it's not going out at all, okay? And to see whether it is going out at all, then let's shine some more chalk dust and see whether we are getting a beam into the surrounding air, okay? Do you see that there is no beam at all above the tank, okay? And it's emerging outside the tank, right, at the two places. So this is a clear demonstration of total internal reflection, And this is the same principle that we see in mirages on a hot day. If you're driving on a long road, we see that there is a pool of water which is lying on the road, but actually that's a mirage, right? And a mirage means there is an illusion, right? So it's not really a pool of water. What we are only seeing is that light is coming from the other side, reflecting, and then coming into our eyes. So what we see then is a kind of an illusion that there seems to be a mirror-like surface or a water-like surface on the road, which is actually not present. Okay, so what you're seeing here is exactly the same principle, that light is going from a denser medium, which is water, into a rarer medium, which is air. And when that happens and the angle exceeds a certain critical angle, you see total internal reflection. Now, this is important for internet, and we are going to connect that again. So what happens is that you can make a fiber out of a certain special material. Okay, it's a glass-like material, and it does not absorb light. It's highly transparent. So what happens is that the surrounding part of that pipe, of that glassy material, is made out of a lower refractive index material. Okay, so then what happens is that you don't have to coat any mirror-like substance on the optical fiber. There is natural total internal reflection when light goes into this optical fiber and does not come out at all. It actually keeps on totally internally reflecting and comes out at the other end. Okay, as you saw in this demonstration, right? And in fact, this is also the principle for rainbow formation. Okay, so we don't have time for going into each of these phenomenon, but if you go through certain images on or videos on Google, on YouTube, then you will see that the water droplets, they actually act like prisms. Okay, so not only do they bend the light, not only do they cause refraction, they actually cause dispersion also, which means that white light from the sun gets split into different colors, and the splitting of the different colors happens in such a way that the refractive index for each color is different. So the bending is slightly different for each color. And when that happens, you see the formation of a rainbow. Now, what is different between white light and the laser? The laser is actually monochromatic, which means that it consists of almost a single color. And hence, when it goes through water, it cannot split. Okay, so it has only a single color. Right. So next, let's try to figure out why does the sky appear blue. Okay, so for this we have a certain other demonstration. Okay, so can you turn this on, please? This one. Yeah, on ಮಾಡಿ.
Light off ಮಾಡಬೇಕು.
ಹಾ, ಲೈಟ್ ಆನ್. ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಒಂಚೂರು ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಹಾಕಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. So what you see here is that light is coming from one end, okay, and when it is going through the other end, all of that is basically appearing to be white. Okay, now this is what would happen if there was no scattering inside this medium. But what you see now is slightly different. Do you see a slightly reddish color on the other side, but whitish color on the side that the light is falling? Although the medium is exactly the same, right? So we have dropped a few drops of phenyl into this tank, and what you see very spectacularly is that on the side where the light is shining, you see whitish, but on the other side, you see reddish. Now you might think that I've added something reddish to this tank. Okay, so let me do one thing. I'll take the light and move it to the other side. Okay, and let's see what happens then. So do you see now? It's all white. There is no reddish color at all. Now let's go to the other side. Okay, so what is happening here? Again, you see a reddish on the other side, and you see whitish on this side. Okay, so what is happening here? Now this white light has several colors, and when the colors go through the scattering medium, what you are seeing is that the red light does not get scattered much. What is getting scattered the most is the blue light. Okay, and this is actually the reason why we see the sky as blue, and that's because when the sunlight comes to the earth, then the blue light is getting scattered by the atmosphere. So it actually gets scattered, and that is what is visible to our eyes. Okay. Now this is during daytime. Exactly the same phenomenon is responsible for the reddish sun during the sunset. So during the sunset, what would happen is that the sun would be at the horizon, and what will reach our eyes is exactly red light, because that is getting scattered least. Now this phenomenon is there in the 10th standard textbook. Okay, and to understand this, you can do a very simple experiment at your home itself. So take a 2-liter water bottle, for example, okay, and then add a few drops of milk or phenyl or whatever you want, right? So then keep it next to a LED light. You must have lights in your house, so take a tube light or an LED light and just keep it next to it. You can see this phenomenon for yourself. Okay, you will see that on the side where the light is falling, you will see a whitish glow, and on the other side, you will see that the water is appearing to be reddish. Okay, and that's because the red light gets scattered the least, right? So this is a demonstration of why the sky appears blue, right? Now let me show you a slightly different thing. Okay, and this phenomenon is again in the 12th standard. This phenomenon is not in your syllabi. Okay, however, it's very interesting and it's very nice to see. Okay, so let me show you that first and then explain why this is happening. Okay, yeah. Okay. Okay. Light off now. Okay. So what I have here is basically a compact disc, a CD. Okay. And yeah. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to shine the laser on this. Okay. So you can't see the path of the light. Okay. But wait a minute. What you see on the ceiling, can you show the ceiling, Dilip? Dilip? Ceiling?
Diffraction pattern.
So what Dilip will now show you is what is happening on the ceiling. Okay. See, do you see so many dots on the ceiling? Okay, which means that the light is getting reflected, but it's getting also diffracted. Okay, so there is a new phenomenon that you will be studying in your 12th standard, and it's really spectacular and extremely useful. Okay, we have a lot of microscopes that use this phenomenon. So what we are going to do now is again spray chalk dust. Okay, and let's see the path of the light, right? So Mr. Vinayak will now do this, and what we will now see is that so do you see the many different reflected rays here? Madam, if you can respond to me, then I will know that you are able to see me.
Yes, sir, we can see that.
Okay, nice.
We are able to see you, sir. We are able to see you.
Okay, nice. Yeah. So do you see the different reflected beams?
Yes.
Okay, and this is happening
Yes,
because there are hundreds of tracks on the compact disc. Okay, these are concentric circles, and when the light shines on this compact disc, what is happening is that the wavelength of the light matches almost the spacing between the tracks. And when the spacing between the tracks matches the wavelength, that's exactly when we get this diffraction pattern. Okay, so that shows us the path of the light. So there is a Tyndall effect also going on here, and we also see the diffraction pattern, right? Okay. So again, this is something that would be understandable by students who have studied optics in the 12th standard, but nevertheless, you can also do this at your home. Even if you have a pointer laser, you can use compact discs, even those which are in use, and then shine this and see. Okay, so you can all get chalk powder, or you can even keep an agarbatti or a dhoop. Okay, and then to see the path of the light and see the spectacular phenomenon for yourself. Right. Okay, so now we are going to do one more experiment, which is basically again related to optics. Okay, and it's a kind of in an interactive session, we would have asked the children some questions, but because this is not interactive, I'll just ask the question and then answer it myself. Okay. Okay, so what we have here is a jar which is filled with oil. Okay. And if you see it closely, you will think that there is only one jar, right? Okay, now what we'll do is, we will actually discover that this jar is not alone. Okay, why is this jar not alone? It's happening because there is oil in it, and the refractive index of oil is actually matching what is there inside the jar. Okay, so let's see how many jars are inside this jar, right? So let's check that. Tissue paper. Tissue paper ತಲ ಇಲ್ಲಿ. Okay, so let's begin. So one has come out, okay, right? Next, another one comes out. Third one comes out. Fourth one comes out. So could you have believed it? Okay, this is almost making the entire thing inside invisible, right? So what is happening there is that it's invisible because, or it's transparent because, what is happening is that light is not bending at all. What I showed you in the beginning was that light bends when light goes from one medium to another medium, right? But here what is happening? If the light had actually bent when the light went from oil to air or oil to glass to air, then we would have actually seen what is inside the jar. But we did not see because the refractive indices of the oil and the glass of which the jars are made of exactly matched each other. And when the refractive indices match each other, there is no bending of light. The light goes in a straight line. And when that happens, you don't see that there is anything kept inside the jar. Okay, so this is also seen if I take this glass rod. Can you come here, Dilip? So what we can do is that we can take this inside. Okay. So yeah. So do you see that the glass rod which I'm going to take inside will actually become invisible? So this has become invisible, right? But it's there, right? So let's take one more and then add it. Again, this is invisible. Okay. So what is happening here again is that the refractive indices of the glass and the oil match each other so well that you don't see anything kept inside the oil jar. Okay. So this is a kind of a magic, but it's science. Okay. And this is again something that you can do at your home. Of course, you will be feeling the wrath of your parents when you waste so much oil, but I would still encourage you to do so. Okay. And what if a little oil is spilled for the sake of science? So let's do it. Okay. Fine. So let's now move on from optics into the next question, which is how do aeroplanes fly? Okay. Now to understand how do aeroplanes fly, let's do first a small experiment. Okay. And that experiment, I just need 2 sheets of paper and a blower. Okay. All right. So what I have here is basically 2 sheets of paper. Okay. And I'm holding it like this. Again, this would have been really nice if this was an interactive session, if all of you were sitting here in front of me and I would be asking questions and you would be telling me what would happen. But unfortunately, that is not possible. So let's get on with this. So I have here 2 sheets of paper and I'm keeping them far apart. And the question that I would be asking you if you were present here is what would happen if I blow hard in between these 2 sheets of paper? Okay. And normally the question is, because we are blowing into this, the sheets should fly apart. Okay, that's our common intuition. However, what really happens is completely counterintuitive. Okay, so let's see what happens and then try to explain why it happens, right? Okay, so what we have here is a very powerful blower. Okay, so Calgary okay, fine, yeah, fine. Okay. Huh. Okay. Sorry, this is a really powerful blower. Okay. Yeah. Huh. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Because it's very powerful.
Yeah, it's a really powerful blower, and what we want to see is what happens when I blow these things, okay, and they are far apart, right? So what you see, I hope, was that these two sheets of paper, instead of moving further apart, they're actually coming closer. And what you will also discover is, if you blow harder, they actually come even closer. Okay, and that's why you heard that sound, okay, of the sheets clashing against each other, repeatedly clashing. Okay, and this is actually the simplest possible way to explain why aeroplanes fly. Okay, now you will ask me, how does this connect to how aeroplanes fly? Okay, so let's see one variation of this. Okay, so imagine that this is the aeroplane wing. Okay, and what I do is that I place engines below this aeroplane wing, right? So what would happen? The engines are basically sucking in air. Okay, the engines have very powerful motors, so they are sucking in air at a very high speed. And when they suck in this air at very high speed, the air below this wing, below the aeroplane wing, is going at a very high speed, right? So let's do the same experiment and then see what happens. Okay. So in fact, what I did was tell you the exact opposite. Okay, so the air has to move above the foil, okay, at a very high speed, right? Okay, yeah, okay. So what did you see? When the air speed was very high here, what you saw was that the sheet was lifting up, right? So what would happen, that the sheet, if it is lifting up, what that means is that there is a lift here, right? So this principle can also be applied in different ways. Okay, so let's do one more tricky experiment. Okay, so the trick that we do here is that we ask students to come on the stage, and then we ask them to blow this very light plastic tennis ball, to blow this out of the funnel. Okay, so what children do is they take it in the mouth and then they try to blow it out. Okay, but unfortunately, the harder you blow, the harder the ball sticks into it. Okay, and that's again very counterintuitive, because if I take this ball in my hand, okay, and then blow it, sorry, yeah, so it's a very light ball, right? So I should be able to blow it out very easily, all right? But then if I put it into the funnel, that becomes an impossible task. Okay, and let me show this to you in a very dramatic way. Okay, so again, what I have here is the blower, and what I'm going to try to do is to blow this tennis ball out of this air funnel, right? So let's try this. Again, that's not possible. So let's try taking it out. So did you see? The ball was almost stuck to the funnel, right? And that's so surprising. So why was the ball stuck to the funnel, okay, and not coming out at all? In fact, if I take this ball and then just put it in without this air blowing and just turn it to this angle, it comes out, right? This was the angle that was sufficient to make the ball fall. right? But then if I blow this, then you can see that I can go down to a much more So the ball didn't fall at all, right? Now let me explain this to you, okay? And this you might study as something called the Bernoulli's principle, okay? So what's happening here is that, again, as the air experiment with the paper sheets showed you, the air is actually trying to go around this tennis ball, right? So when the air is trying to go around this tennis ball, what is going to happen is that the air pressure around this tennis ball is going to get lowered. Okay, that's exactly what was happening with the sheet of paper as well. So, or with the two sheets of paper. When the air was blowing at a very high speed, the pressure inside or between the two sheets was extremely low, but the air pressure outside is very high, right? And that air pressure basically brings the two sheets together, or it gives the lift to the aeroplane, or it is actually holding this tennis ball. Now, how does this hold? How does this tennis ball holding into the funnel? What's happening is that the air pressure which is acting right on the top of the tennis ball is very high. But the air has to escape, right? And when the air escapes, it creates a low pressure region. And that low pressure region, coupled with this high air pressure from the top, basically makes the tennis ball stick to the funnel. Okay, so this is again, so all these phenomena that you see are actually related to each other, right? And the underlying principle for all these phenomena is basically the Bernoulli's principle, okay, which is when air flows at very high speed, or any fluid for that matter, it creates a low pressure region in that region where the air speed is very high. And because it is very low, the air pressure is very low in that region where the airspeed is very high, the surrounding air from the other sides, or the air pressure on the other sides, which is very high, tends to push things towards the region where there is low pressure. Okay. Now let's see one more spectacular demonstration of the same phenomenon, where we will invert this funnel. Okay. And then let's try to see if this tennis ball can be suspended in mid-air. Okay, so let's do this. And many of you might have seen this, but again, this phenomenon is also related to the Bernoulli's principle itself. Okay, and let me explain to you why that happens right after the demonstration. Okay. ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಮೇಲ್ಗಡೆ ಇಡು. So when the ball was in the air, you might have thought that because it is vertical, the air column is supporting it. But what then I showed you is that when I tilt the funnel, okay, at an angle, even then the ball is suspended in midair, right? Now here also the Bernoulli's principle is at play. But there is something more also, and let me not go into the details, but what is again happening is that in the air column, okay, in the air column which this air blower is throwing out, the air pressure is low. And the tennis ball, which is suspended in midair, is actually in that low pressure region. Okay, even when it tries to fall out, the air which is surrounding that air column is pushing that ball in. Okay, which is why even when I turned it, even when I tilted the funnel, the ball did not fall down. Okay, so this is all related to the Bernoulli's principle. So I would encourage all of you to do these very simple experiments at home and understand this Bernoulli's principle, and through that understand the more complicated applications that we see around us in our daily life. Okay, okay. So this was about fluids. Now let's move on. How are we doing with time? Okay, so it's 11:35, right? 11:40. Okay. Okay, yeah. So now we'll look at the formation of the lightning. Okay. So before I start the lightning explanation, let me show you something. And some of you might have seen this. So this is called the plasma globe. Okay. So let's see what happens when we turn this on. Okay. On. Okay.
Light off.
Light off. Okay, so what do you see here? you must be seeing filaments of light. Okay, so these are filaments of light coming from the core onto the surface, right? So, and those filaments of light will change when I touch this. Okay, so let me touch this with my finger. Okay, now do you see that there is a single filament which is forming? Right? So this single filament that is forming is actually a simulation of the lightning that you see in the skies. Right? So what is happening here? This plasma globe, inside the plasma globe, there is actually a noble gas. All of you have studied noble gases, right? Helium, neon, argon, and so on. So what is contained inside this is a mixture of noble gases. And the core of it, the red part that you see inside, is actually a very high voltage object. Okay, and the glass, okay, always has some kind of a charge, right? Or even if it is neutral, the core of it is highly charged as compared to the glass surface. And because of that, the noble gas is able to conduct this charge from this core onto the surface. Now, when I touch it, it turns out my hand is also acting like a conductor. Okay, and as soon as my hand touches this, a single filament forms from that core onto the surface, and that's what we call lightning. Right? So now let me explain to you why this lightning happens. Okay, what is the principle underlying it? And then we will do a little bit of a few experiments to understand this. So let's have the lights again. All right. So the question that we are asking is, how does lightning form and how does it strike? So this phenomenon, this entire phenomenon is called triboelectricity. Okay, and it's basically electricity production through friction. Now, all of us, when we wear woolen clothes or silky clothes or synthetic clothes, we observe that when these clothes rub against each other, we can see sparks, right? Now, that is again an example of triboelectricity, or producing electricity through friction. So what is happening here? A very simple thing. When you rub things against each other, the electrons on one material jump onto the other material, creating charges on the two materials. Okay, and that is the simplest way in which electric charge gets transferred from one object to the other object, just by rubbing. Okay, now how is this related to lightning? Right? So what is happening in the atmosphere is that the water droplets which are present in the air, okay, they keep rubbing against air molecules and other water molecules, right? So what that does is that it creates charge on these water droplets, okay, and in fact the cloud as a whole gets charged massively. In fact, if you go through the numbers, you'll be surprised that in one lightning strike, the cloud can transmit millions of volts. I mean, the cloud is actually charged to a potential of millions of volts, and in a single lightning strike, thousands of coulombs can get transferred from the cloud to the earth. Okay. Now, how does that happen? Normally, air is an insulator, right? Now, this is happening because of another phenomenon called dielectric breakdown. Okay. So normally, a material which is an insulator, if you subject it to very high voltages, like what the cloud and the earth, okay, between the cloud and the earth, there is a very high voltage. And that high voltage leads to a breakdown of this air in between the cloud and the earth. And that's what leads to a transfer of the charge, or it creates a medium, okay, through which this charge from the cloud gets transferred onto the earth, right? And that's what we see as lightning. So now let's see one more striking application, or a toy which uses this phenomenon, okay? And I like to play this. So this is available on Amazon. You can actually order it, okay? And this is called a fly stick, right? So what it does is, this fly stick has something called a Van de Graaff generator inside it. Okay, and the Van de Graaff generator basically collects charges by rubbing, okay, through friction. So this, you see, is a metallic strip. Okay, and what you see here is a shapeless metallic strip, right? But what will happen is that when I turn this fly stick on, okay, you will see something very nice. So let's try this. Okay. It's a little bit of a trick to manage this. So give me some time. Okay. All right. Yeah. So do you see what is happening? That this shapeless thing gets a shape. And you can play with this for hours together. Okay. So what is happening here is that this Van de Graaff generator is getting charged very highly. Okay. And this metallic strip, what is happening is that when I first touch it, it gets the same charge. Now, like charges will repel, right? And then not only does this get charged, all of these parts, all of the three strands of this piece get charged by the same charge, right? So then they will also repel each other. But then you will ask me, why does, when I turn this off, why does this again shrink? Okay, why does it not keep repelling? It turns out that the air surrounding this object collects all that charge and discharges this very quickly. Okay, so that is why it's important to keep this on, and then only then you will actually keep playing. Okay, so do you see this? It takes a little bit of practice to keep it floating, but you can play this game and you can ask who can keep this floating for the longest, right? Okay, so let's now try one more experiment with this, okay, with the same principle. Praveen. All right. So what I have here is a PVC pipe, and this is a synthetic cloth, right? And all of you can try this at home. So what I'm going to do is to just rub this, okay? And I hope this will work. So this is actually, this will become old. Yeah. So let's try this. And here I have a Coke can, okay? So I'm going to keep this so it's not visible. Delete the Coke will focus at that. Okay, so what is happening when I'm rubbing this? It should get charged, right? And then, well, this is not getting charged. So let's see. No. It's a dynamic charge. Okay, fine. Okay, so normally this would have worked, but we have not used this for a long time because of the lockdown and other things. So this cloth is not able to produce charge on this. Hence, we will use the Van de Graaff generator itself. And what you see here is that the Coke can starts rolling as I turn on this Van de Graaff generator. Okay. Right? So it's acting like a magic wand. Even though I'm not touching it, okay, and in fact if I touch it, it should actually get repelled, okay, but then the metal discharges very quickly, so it actually keeps attracting. So let me explain why this is happening. Okay, so remember, every metal has a lot of electrons inside it, because of which it is a conductor, right? So what is happening, this is producing charge. And now when I keep this next to this metal can, what is happening? Let's say this is negatively charged. It will attract the positive charge inside this metal. In fact, inside this aluminum can, there are no positive free charges. But what is free inside this aluminum can? It's the free electrons. So what would happen is that this negative charge would actually repel the electrons onto the other side of the Coke can, which means that on this side, there will be a lesser number of electrons, or there will be more positive charge, right? Because overall, this aluminum can has to be neutral. And because there is a positive charge on this side, but a negative charge on the fly stick, this is going to get attracted. Okay, So that's what you see here, right? So even without touching it, I can make it roll. Okay. Yeah, so this is again another example where you can use electrostatics to move things even without touching them, right? So this would normally work even at home if you had taken just a simple PVC pipe, okay, and then use a synthetic cloth to rub it vigorously so that a charge can be produced on this. And once charge is produced on this, you can take again an aluminium metallic can, okay, and then use this to basically roll this and play with it. Okay, so this again teaches you a lot of nice things. So do play with this. Okay, I would encourage all of you to play with these things and then do these experiments at home, ask questions, and then come back to me. Okay, if you have more questions. So let's move on with more experiments. All right. So in fact, we do have a lot more experiments here, and if we had time, we would have shown them to you. But unfortunately, we don't have enough time. Yeah, I'll show that. So, but just as a simple, just a demonstration, I'll show you something. So, so we want to show you something very nice. It's okay. It's okay. No, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Yeah. Idhar ಮೇಲೆ focus ಮಾಡಿ ಅಷ್ಟೇ. Okay. So I hope you can see this balancing tower. Okay. So these are actually individual rods that are kept here. And what you should see is that the last rod is in fact hanging outside the table. Right. So this is actually a center of mass illusion. And the center of mass is again a concept that you would be studying in your syllabus. And using the center of mass concept, we can actually show a lot of illusions. In fact, we have a whole range of experiments based on the center of mass concept. Unfortunately, we will not do that at this point of time. We will do that at some other later stage if we get one more session. So in fact, there is using the center of mass, we can actually show one more illusion. Okay. So this is something that many of you would have seen in the Visvesvaraya Science Museum in a very grand way. So what you see here is a slope, okay, and this funnel-like object, in fact, if I take this pipe, it will actually roll down, right? So the reason is that gravity pulls it down, right? But then I can create an object which seems to be anti-gravity, okay? So it seems to be going against the gravity. Okay, so this is again a center of mass illusion. I will not explain this now, and maybe some other time when we get some time, we will try to go into this. In fact, there are other things also that you can make at home.
Okay, this is also center of mass toy.
So again, another center of mass toy, right? So it's just balancing on this. And this is again something very spectacular. So you see, this is a bird, and this bird is going to balance on its beak. Okay. One. So it's balancing just on its beak. Okay. So this is again a center of mass illusion, and it's a very, very interesting concept, which is extremely useful in construction, in automobile industry, in many other places. So do study it well. Okay, that's all I can say. So now let's go a little bit into electricity and magnetism. Okay, and in 10th standard you study the concept of a motor. So here we are going to show you a motor, but it's probably the world's simplest motor. Now what we are going to show is not an original idea. These things are available on YouTube. You can go through them. You can make them. Okay. So what we are seeing here, I'll go there. Okay. Okay, I hope you can see this. So what we have here is, let me pull these things apart and show you. Okay, right. So first of all, there is a battery here. Okay, then these are disc magnets. These are neodymium magnets. Okay, so they look like this, and these are two safety pins. Okay, which have been attached to the negative and positive terminals. Now, what is here is that there is a copper wire which has been wound into a coil. The special thing about this copper wire, if you can see clearly, is that it's reddish here, but it is brownish here. Okay, and this is called an encapsulated copper wire. Okay, so it's actually encapsulated means that the current will not escape out and escape into the other wires. Okay, but here that encapsulation has been removed in the very ends so that the electricity can be transmitted. Okay, so what we are going to do is that we are going to place this coil in between the two safety pins. Okay, that's all, right? So, and what you see here is that this coil starts turning by itself, right? And this is the simplest explanation of a motor, right? So what is happening here? Okay, all of you have studied, or you will study, that when current flows through a metallic conductor, through a wire, if you place magnets close to it, then the conductors will actually feel a force. Okay, and in 12th standard you will see what is that force called, right? But at the level of 9th and 10th standard you will not know what that force is called. You will only know that magnets can exert a force on electric currents. Okay, and that is the principle we are using to actually build this motor. Okay, so the magnetic field lines are coming out, and when current flows through it, what is going to happen is that the two ends of the coil, okay, feel an opposite force because of the Fleming's rules. Okay, and the opposite force on these two ends of the coil helps it to turn. Basically, it is applying a torque on the coil, and that torque is creating a rotatory motion of the coil. Okay, so this is an experiment that again you can do at home. All you need is a AA cell, okay, or a AAA cell, doesn't matter. You need two safety pins. You need some encapsulated copper wire and neodymium magnets. Neodymium magnets are not very easy to get. If you go to toy shops, you will only see ferrite magnets, and they're not powerful enough. But you can order them on Amazon, or if somebody is more enterprising, you can go to KR Market and there get these neodymium magnets, and they're not very expensive. Okay, but these are super strong magnets, so make sure you don't allow very young kids to come near you, okay, when you're playing with these neodymium magnets. Okay, and then there are several variations of these motors that one can make, right? So there is another variation that Mr. Pattar makes, which is this. So you see, it's just, it's going too fast. White background, Becca.
In the paper. You can see this.
Yeah.
You must have scared it.
So you see this turning by itself, right? So again, the principle is the same. The copper wire is connecting the top and the bottom, but through the magnet. Okay, and because the copper wire is conducting current, the magnets just below the cell are providing that magnetic field to make this coil rotate. Okay, so this is another very simple demonstration of a DC motor. Okay, and you will study the DC motor in the 10th standard in full gory detail, but what you will see there is very complicated armature and other kinds of things, but the principle is basically very simple. Okay, the principle is that when current flows through a wire and you apply a magnetic field on it, it feels a force. Okay, and you just have to make sure that the force on the two ends of the coil are in opposite directions. That's it, right? When the coil experiences a force which is opposite on the two ends of the coil, then it will rotate. That's it. That's that's the principle of a motor, right? Now you might ask that, can I reverse this motor? Okay, what I'm using here is using current, okay, to produce rotatory motion, which means I'm using electrical energy to produce mechanical energy. Can I do the reverse? Okay, can I use mechanical energy and produce current out of it? And the answer is indeed yes. this is what is used in generators, okay, using turbines. So for example, hydroelectric turbines or nuclear power turbines, all of them, what they do is you produce mechanical energy, okay, through some means, maybe falling water or steam or whichever it is, and that turns the turbine. And when the turbine turns, that is mechanical energy that you are giving as an input, and what comes out is electrical energy. Okay, so let's see a demonstration of this, right? So what I have here is a fan which I've taken out of an old CPU. Okay, so this is a freely rotating fan, right? So what I'm going to do again is to make this rotate, okay, using air from the blower. Okay, so this is what you would see in, for example, a windmill, right? In a windmill, what would happen is that the wind would basically blow this the fans, okay, the blades of the fan, and that should produce electricity, right? So let's see if that happens. The connection is slightly okay. I did see it glow for just a second, but then it went off. Let me see. We have again not used this in a very long time, so I hope this works. Let us see. Okay. So I hope you saw the bulb glow. It was an LED bulb, okay? And only when the blades are turning at a very high speed, that is when you see this LED bulb glowing, right? Otherwise, you don't see it. So let's see it once more, okay? Okay, so that tells you that if you take a motor, okay, and run it with some form of energy. So there is mechanical energy, there is wind energy here, which was providing the energy for the rotation of the blades, and that rotation in turn produced a current, okay, and that current led to a glowing of this bulb, of this LED bulb, right? All right. So now let's get back to the last question. So I had showed you a small video on magnetic levitation trains, right? So what was happening there was that these bullet trains, you might have heard of these bullet trains which go at like 300 miles per hour and so on, which is around 450 to 500 kilometers per hour. So how do trains travel at that speed? Okay, so it turns out that the trains are not even touching the ground. Okay, they're actually riding on air, but it's not as if there is an air cushion that they are creating. What is happening there is that there is a magnetic force that is helping the train to be levitated. Okay, so the train is actually levitating above the ground. Okay, and then it is being propelled. Because of that, there is almost no friction between the tracks and the train. Okay, now how does this work? Right? How do you create such powerful magnetic fields in order to levitate an entire train? If you try that with your usual magnets, it will be impossible. Okay, so if you try that with your usual magnets, it will be just impossible to do it, right? So what you need for producing such strong magnetic fields is something called a superconductor. Okay, now you will ask me, what is a superconductor? So a superconductor is very different from a usual metal, insulator, or a semiconductor. So that's the classification you study in the textbooks, right? Any material is either a metal or an insulator or a semiconductor. You might have also seen something called a semi-metal as well. But what I am telling you is a fifth form of matter called superconductor. Now, a superconductor is very different because it experiences or it offers no resistance against electric current. Normally, when electric current is passing through a wire, if you touch the wire, it becomes hot. Okay, and that heat is being produced by electrons which are hitting against the lattice ions. Okay, so inside this wire there are ions, and the electrons keep hitting against them, and that produces the heat. And that is something you study as Joule heating, right? So in a superconductor, that phenomenon doesn't happen at all. When electrons flow through the superconductor, they have no resistance, which means they don't produce heat at all. Okay. Now that happens due to a very special effect. Okay, and to understand that, you need concepts from a branch of physics called quantum mechanics. Okay, so let's not go into that now. Okay, but what we will show you is how to create these, or how to see these superconductors in action. Okay, so before we see the superconductor, yeah, we'll come to that. What we will do is we will use liquid nitrogen to actually produce the superconductor. Okay, now liquid nitrogen is not something that you see in your daily lives. Okay, so let me tell you, liquid nitrogen is a liquid which is at extremely low temperatures, around minus 196 degrees Celsius, and there is no place on earth which is that cold, right? Okay, so at the most you will see around minus 70 degrees Celsius. That is the probably the coldest place on earth, right? So what we have here in the lab is a material which is colder than anything on earth. Okay, so let's see what this liquid nitrogen looks like. Okay, wait 1 second. Balloon hello. Okay, so so what I have here is a balloon. Okay, and what I'm going to do is to pour liquid nitrogen on this balloon. Okay, and let's see what happens to it, right? So do you see what is happening? It's just shrinking. So it had shrunk to almost nothing. And now what is happening is, now that the liquid nitrogen has been removed, the balloon is coming back to its original shape. Okay. So what happened there? In fact, the air inside the balloon became so cold that its volume decreased. And this is something that you study in your chemistry, right? V1 by T1 is a constant, which is what you call the Charles law. Okay, so V1 by T1 is equal to constant means that when the temperature is decreased, the volume will also decrease simultaneously. Okay, so the liquid nitrogen is so cold that it can actually decrease the volume drastically. Okay, and that is what we need to create this superconductor. Okay, so let me show you what is a superconductor, how does it look like, and what will we do to make it a superconductor. Okay, so here what I have is a small boat. Okay, and inside this boat I have kept a disc-like material. Okay, and you will see a black disc. You can show it. And this black disc is a ceramic material. Okay, and for those of you who understand, this material is called YbCO, ytterbium barium copper oxide. Okay, and this material, if you start cooling it and make it colder and colder, when its temperature becomes lower than the liquid nitrogen temperature, it turns into a superconductor. At normal temperatures, it is not a superconductor at all. Okay, at normal temperatures, it's like a dirty metal. Okay, and it has resistance. But when liquid nitrogen is poured on it and it becomes really, really cold, that's when it becomes a superconductor. Now, a superconductor is not only a superconductor in the sense that it is not just that it has zero resistance. It has a very special property. Its property is that it expels all magnetic field which is trying to go through it. Okay, so what we have done here is that if you see, there is actually a wooden plank here. Okay, and inside this we have placed magnets. These are super strong neodymium magnets. Okay, neodymium boron ferrite magnets, and these magnets are creating the track for the magnetic levitation train. Okay, so what we are going to do is that the boat that we showed you, we have poured liquid nitrogen in it, and now we are going to place that boat on this track. Okay, so let's see what happens. Okay. Clear? Oops. So do you see this floating? Okay. In fact, if you could see this closely, if you were here in this room, you would see that there is actually nothing in between the boat and the track. Okay. So it's actually floating. Okay. And if this were not cooled down to liquid nitrogen temperatures, it would not be able to float. Right? The only reason it is floating is because inside that boat there is a superconductor, and that superconductor is able to expel all the magnetic field that is going through it. And because it is expelling all magnetic field, it is actually repelling the magnets. Okay, and this is a kind of a material called a diamagnet. So when you study magnetism, you will see that there are many kinds of magnets. There are ferromagnets, there are antiferromagnets, there are ferrimagnets, there are diamagnets. Okay, this superconductor becomes what is called a perfect diamagnet, which means it expels all magnetic field that is trying to go through it. Okay, and that is what is used in a magnetic levitation train. Okay, so imagine building a train which has liquid nitrogen inside it and also large amounts of superconductor. Now, if the tracks are magnetic, then the tracks will basically lift it. Okay. Now, what we cannot show you here is that there is another phenomenon here happening called quantum trapping. Okay, and for those of you who want to understand more, just go through the internet and look at what is quantum trapping. So what is happening here is that even if we change the track, okay, and we tilt it, this superconductor does not actually fall. What we do is we actually invert it and we show only the superconductor. Okay, and then it turns out that the superconductor can actually float even inverted. Right. So let's try that once. We'll have to remove that. We'll just try this once. Okay, we'll see if it works. And that's the last experiment. Okay. That's okay. Yeah. Okay, so we are going to attempt to turn the track upside down. Okay, and then see if the superconductor can actually float upside down as well. Okay, and that's the reason we don't actually need side walls to hold the train. Okay, there are natural brakes in this track. It actually holds the train all by itself. Okay, so let's see. Shall we try? Okay, so yeah, the superconductor is getting cold now. So, okay. Fine. Let's see. Okay, let's try. It goes really fast. Oh, okay. It gets hot very quickly. Okay, so that's the reason why you don't see this. Yeah, we'll keep it in liquid nitrogen for some time, and then okay. So Mrs. Hema, we are now done. Okay, so all our whatever we intended to show, we have shown that. So you can take over, and if there are questions from students, I'm happy to take questions.
So that was the best physics class I think I have attended. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think there is echo. Really sorry, but I will ask the students if they can ask questions and really learn from this. Children, if you have any questions, please, you can come forward. Yes, Arav, Manyal, please go ahead, one at a time.
Yes, Arnav, you can ask your question.
Yeah, please go ahead. Huh? Oh, this.
Yes, ma'am, can I ask?
Yeah. Continue.
Sir, this is related to the first experiment that you showed us about light.
Yeah,
So light has dual nature, no, sir?
that's right.
So is it like, as sometimes it behaves like a wave and sometimes it behaves like a particle?
Yeah.
So
Very
when does
good
it
question.
behave?
What's your name? What's your name?
Arnav.
Arnab. Arnab, that's a beautiful question. So it turns out light does have dual nature. As you said, it behaves like a wave sometimes and it behaves like a ray sometimes. Okay. But then this is a very deep concept related to something called quantum theory. Okay. And the property of light, whether it's a wave or a particle, actually depends on what you are measuring. Okay. So, in fact, there is going to be a talk day after tomorrow that I'm going to be giving on the mysterious quantum world. Okay, so that's a follow-up talk for 11th and 12th standard. What I would do is I would encourage you to attend it if it's possible for you. There I am going to explain that when you are measuring a quantum object, okay, you are actually changing the state of that quantum particle in a very radical way. So what I mean is that if you are trying to measure the particle nature by putting a detector, let's say a charge coupled device, a CCD device, then the quantum system will behave like a particle. If you try to observe interference from the quantum particle, then it will show its wave-like behavior. So in fact, it's a very counterintuitive concept that a quantum particle can be both a wave and a particle at exactly the same time. And this can be understood through a concept called the wave function. Okay, so I will not try to go into detail about the wave function, but if you get some time, do come for the Wednesday lecture. I might explain a little bit about the wave function. Okay, it requires concepts which go beyond the 9th and 10th standard. But if you write to me, we can talk more and then I'll explain this to you. Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Manya, you can ask your question. Manya?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, sir.
Afternoon.
My doubt was regarding the Bernoulli's principle.
Yeah.
Sir?
Yes, go on.
Yeah,
Go on.
I just wanted to know if it is only used in rockets or like what all is it used in, and
Okay,
why
yeah.
is it used in rockets?
Sure. Yeah, actually the Bernoulli's principle is not used in the rockets at all. So what is used in rockets is basically the Newton's third law. Okay. So in the Newton's third law, a thrust is created by the gases that are coming out of the tail end of the rocket, right? And that huge thrust creates an upward movement of the rocket. Okay. That is very different from the principle that I explained to you. What I explained to you was the creation of a low pressure region due to high speed of air. Okay, so in the case of the rocket, when the high speed air is coming out of the tail end, there is a low pressure region that is created. However, there is also a thrust that is created. Okay, and due to conservation of momentum, which is equivalent to the Newton's third law, what is going to happen is that there is a huge mass or a momentum that is going in the downward direction. So to conserve momentum, there has to be a thrust upward, which is given to the rocket, and the rocket is able to move up. Okay, but what is happening in the case of aeroplanes is something very different. So imagine an air wing, okay, and imagine the air which is going above the wing at a very high speed. Now, how is that done? That is done through a very clever design of the wings. Okay, and if you can design the wing in a very clever way such that the airspeed on the top of the wing is very high as compared to the bottom part of the wing, then what you're doing is that you're creating a low pressure region above the wing, and a high pressure region already exists below the wing. Okay, so this is going to push this up, right? And that is Bernoulli's principle. So Manya, is that clear to you? What is the difference between the conservation of momentum principle for the rocket, whereas we are using Bernoulli's principle in aeroplanes?
Yes, sir. So, and triboelectricity,
Yes.
is it used in something? Like, is it used for?
Of course. So triboelectricity is extremely useful. It has been used in many things, including, let me tell you one very the newest invention in our center. So the director of our center, Professor G.U. Kulkarni, has made a mask. Okay, so in these times of pandemic, everybody is, I mean, all designers are making masks and so on, right? So it turns out they have made a very clever mask using triboelectricity. Now you'll ask me, what is the new thing about this mask? So in this mask, what they've done is they have taken 3 different layers. Okay, and these 3 different layers, when they rub against each other, they create electricity. They create static electricity. Now, as we breathe and we come into contact with other people, let's say that I have come into contact with somebody who is infected. And when that person is sneezing or coughing, these virus particles come and sit on my mask, right? Then ideally, I should be throwing away that mask, because if I reuse it, then there is a chance that I will get infected. Now, what this special mask created by Professor G.U. Kulkarni does is that it actually kills the virus particles. And how does it do that? Remember, the virus is a very, very tiny particle. Most of the masks that we use have pores which are bigger than the virus. So the virus can actually get in to the mask, through the mask. Okay. But then this triboelectric mask, what it does is that it is creating layers of electricity, right? So when the virus particle gets in, it gets electrified. It gets electrocuted actually. Okay. So this triboelectric mask is special because not only can you reuse it, the virus particles are actually getting killed as soon as they touch this mask. Okay, so that's one very new use of mask. But then this fly stick that I showed you is a mini example of something called a Van de Graaff generator. Okay, the Van de Graaff generator can generate millions of volts through this triboelectric principle. So I would encourage you to go through your textbooks or through Google and search for VANDEGRAFF, Van de Graaff generator. Okay, so that's one of the biggest uses of triboelectricity, right? So, and if you just type in triboelectricity on the net, you will see multiple uses of this, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So, and can't triboelectricity be used to cure, used in medicine? I mean, prevent.
Yeah, that's a good
virus.
question. I am not sure right now. I will, yeah, offhand, I don't know if triboelectricity has been used in medicine, but let me think, okay? And if I get an answer, I will pass it on to Mrs. Madhura.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Arnav, go ahead, Arnav.
Yes, ma'am. Sir, for the magnetic levitation experiment that we did, we were pushing the object so that it traveled, so that
Correct.
it moved. Yeah.
Correct.
So the same thing in maglev trains. How does the maglev trains move? Because there's no one pushing.
Very
it.
good. Very good. Very good. So what you can do is, because the maglev train is floating on top of the track, what you can do is you can tweak the magnetic fields ever so slightly so that you are not, the magnetic field lines are not exactly vertical, but they're slightly tilted, right? So imagine that if this superconductor, which was floating on the track, if I'm able to tilt it ever so slightly, which I can do inside a train, right? If I tilt it ever so slightly, what would happen is that the magnetic field lines, instead of being vertical, would actually get tilted, and because of that, it would be an automatic push. Okay, so the brakes are also working in the same way. So I didn't show you the brakes, but here this track actually has these magnets lined up in a very special way. So let me show you that. So if you see this track, it's built in a very special way. Okay, so you see these 3 different tracks of magnets, and then at the very end, if you see, the alignment has been changed. Okay, so I hope there is no glare on this. So there is, the alignment of these magnets has been changed slightly. Okay, and what this does is, if you had noticed, the superconductor was going all the way down, and then by itself it came back. Do you remember that, Arnab?
Yes, sir.
I didn't have to push it back, right? So in some cases, when it was going very fast, it was actually toppling down, but in other cases, it was automatically coming back, right?
Yes, sir.
So what was happening is that by changing the alignment ever so slightly, you can create automatic brakes. Okay, and again, I was hinting at some phenomenon called quantum trapping, and what happened there was that what happens there is that the magnetic field lines can actually trap the magnet. Okay, so the magnetic field lines don't go through it, but they go around the magnet, around the superconductor, and that holds the superconductor in place. Okay, so even if I tilt this, or even if the superconductor or if the train tries to go outside the track, it is brought in by the magnetic field. Okay, so you don't need sidewalls, and by tilting the magnetic field ever so slightly, you can give it a push. Okay, and you can increase the speeds, but remember there is always a speed limit. The reason there is a speed limit is that the magnetic fields which are holding the superconductor can only hold up to a certain speed. If it goes beyond a certain speed, then it will go off track. Okay, does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Yes, Manya, tell me, tell the doubt. You can ask.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I just Googled about the Bernoulli equation and the rockets, and it said that there was a new liquid rocket engines which was based on this equation.
So liquid rockets based on this Bernoulli's principle, is it?
Yes, sir. It says fluid flows from high pressure at the head end of the left towards the low pressure at the exhaust on the right. In between the flow area of the pipe in which the fluid flows is manipulated to accelerate the fluid. The most natural point in the fluid flows is called the throat. Yeah.
Very good. So is this the newest thing that Elon Musk has invented? Their company, they have invented a spacecraft which can actually hop. Have you seen that newest video? So the see, normally when you build a rocket and you want to send it to outer space, you need something called an escape velocity, right? And an escape velocity is acquired only when there is a backward thrust or a downward thrust, and that is what gives the upward thrust to the rocket. Do you can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir, we can hear you, sir.
Yes,
Good. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I was saying that the thrust concept, the Newton's third law or the conservation of momentum concept, is the concept that has been used to power traditional rockets. Okay. So let's say you don't want to hop, but you just want to send a really big object into space, right? Like a satellite, for example. Then you would use these thrusters to create momentum in the upward direction by throwing momentum in the opposite direction. Okay, so that gives you an upward thrust and you go in. But then let us say you don't want to go all the way out into the space. You just want to do a hopping. Okay, then I believe that there must be a combination of Bernoulli's principle and this conservation of momentum in order to create this thrust, which is very controllable. Okay, so this must be a very newer design, and I'm not very familiar with the engineering principle.
That's how the principle is used in the engine, in the rockets.
So again, so as in the aeroplanes, what you're doing is you're creating low pressure regions, right?
Yes.
And by creating low pressure regions in places that you want, you can create lifts, right? So imagine, what does a helicopter do? So the helicopter's rotor is placed at the top, right?
Yes, sir.
And by rotating the wind at a very high speed, what you're doing is you're creating a low pressure region there. And because it's a low pressure region, the helicopter gets sucked into it. It's lifting up. Correct?
Yes, sir.
And if the rotation is precisely balanced, then the lift due to this rotating the rotating blades of the helicopter and the weight of the helicopter are exactly balanced, and the helicopter can actually get suspended in air. And if the speed of the blades is made higher, it will lift even higher, and if the speed is lowered, it will come down. Right? So you're just balancing the upward thrust or the pressure difference due to the air pressure at the bottom of the helicopter and the air pressure at the top of the helicopter by rotating the blades of the helicopter, right?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Good.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, Arnav, ask.
Ma'am, I don't know if my doubt will actually be related to the topic that we are taught now.
It's okay. Go ahead. If I can answer you, I will answer. If I cannot,
Sir,
I will say that I don't know.
Sir, it is said that nothing can travel faster than light.
Yes.
But then I was reading up, sir, where it said that two particles can share information faster than the speed of light.
Mm-hmm.
So how is
Okay.
that possible?
Yeah. So again, you're going into the talk. So you're already giving a preview of the talk that is going to happen on Wednesday. Okay. So there is a principle called quantum entanglement, right? So
Yes,
what
sir.
happens is you can entangle two particles at a distance, and it turns out that you can disturb one of those particles. Okay. And when you disturb the state of one of those particles, the other particle state gets disturbed even before light can reach it. Okay. So the reason that happens is because these two particles are entangled in a quantum mechanical way, and it turns out that what you are saying is not completely precise, in the sense that even though I can change the state of these two particles, I cannot transmit information faster than the speed of light. What I can, however, do is to use this principle of quantum entanglement to do something called quantum encryption. Okay, so let's say you are you have your laptop and you're trying to access your bank account by putting in your password, right? And there is a hacker who is sitting out there who is hacking the internet and he's trying to steal your password. Okay, so then all that he has to do is to know how does this internet work, right? There must be some SSH protocol. There is a secure shell protocol, and that secure shell he or she has to hack. Okay, but then these are all based on classical computers. What one can do using this quantum entanglement principle is that one can encrypt the information in such a way that there is no hacking possible at all. Okay, even in principle. If you try to disturb the state of the system even ever so slightly, the other part of the system will immediately know that the state of this part has been disturbed. Okay, immediately means immediately, but that does not transmit any information. Remember that. Okay, all it does is it encrypts your information in such a way that whatever you're trying to input, you will immediately know that there is a hacker sitting out there and you will stop sending the password. Okay, but more on this on Wednesday. Fine?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Priya ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. So thank you, sir. I think this has been a really wonderful session for all our students. And
Thank you.
I would like our student Anchal to present the vote of thanks.
Okay.
And also, Ms. Priya, I want
Yes.
Arnav to attend the program on Wednesday if that is possible. Please let him be
Yes,
excused for
ma'am.
the classes.
We'll do that. Yes, ma'am. We'll do that.
Thank you.
Yes. A very good afternoon to all. I think I speak for everybody when I say it's an honor to attend this session. I'd like to start by thanking Professor Vidyarthi Raja, Mr. Vinayak Patar, the scientific officer at JNU, Mr. Praveen, and Mr. Vaibhav Rao from JNCASR, and the audiovisual technician, Mr. Mune Gowda, for taking the time to not only explain how things work, but for showing us how they do. I believe that minds of young students like us are more open and receptive when we hear people like Professor Vidyarthi Raja and his team and all the impressive work they have done. Thank you for inspiring us to think outside the box. I'd also like to thank our respective principal, Ms. Hema Nagarajan and Ms. Madhura Prashant, for giving us the opportunity to be part of the workshop and learn something new. Last but not the least, I'd like to thank all the students who logged in. Once again, thank you and have a nice day.
I would like to add one more thing. In fact, the hall in which we are doing experiments is called the CNR Rao Hall of Science, and this was donated by the CNR Rao Foundation. Professor CNR Rao is a Bharat Ratna awardee, and he is also the founder president of this center. And the unit which he has founded is called the Education Technology Unit, and Mr. Vinayak Patra is actually employed in the Education Technology Unit. So this unit specializes in these outreach programs and creating, experimental kits for school and college teachers as well as children. So I would encourage you to visit the website. There are a lot of other materials as well. They produce CDs, multimedia, books also, and so on. So the ETU has been instrumental in making this outreach program possible. So I would like to thank the ETU also.
Thank you so much, sir. And we look forward to more of these programs and more of these workshops from you all. So, and we look forward to Wednesday session as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Sir, it's been a learning for us too, for me too. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.